This meeting is being recorded.
Your appointment is, and we'll go from there. John Kratzley, back from Hawaii.
The select board, I'm John Kratzley, and a select board appointee.
Thank you. Nancy Nelson.
Nancy Nelson, Historical Commission.
Thank you. And Paul, who's in Hawaii. Look at that background. Hi, Paul.
I think we have a rule that somebody has to be in Hawaii at all times. So.
Then I'll carry whoever luggage is going next.
Paul Dome, Recreation Commission appointee.
Thank you. Peter Ward.
Peter Ward, Select Board appointee.
Thank you. Tom
Tom
Kearns.
Kearns, Select Board appointee.
Thank you. Sarah Grimwood.
Sarah Grimwood, Natural Resources Commission appointee.
And Burton Flint.
Burton Flint, Planning Board.
Thank you. And Diane Proctor, Select Board appointee. We have some serious work to do tonight. I hope you each received and had a chance to review two documents that were presented to us. The first is the summary of the conversation that Heather Gill, Nancy Nelson, Marcia Rasmussen, and I had with Stuart Saganor, who is the coordinator of the CPC on a statewide basis on January, I think it was the 14th, 2022. And to review for those people who have not seen that document, there were some, he addressed some of the questions that have surfaced about the Right Tavern project, and he addressed them. Hi, Charles, welcome. You want to say that you're here and what your appointing a committee is, please? Charles? You're not muted, so you can speak. You're on.
Yes, I'm here.
And your appointing committee is the?
I'm sorry, is the Concord Housing Authority.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, now we're all here. Fantastic. Again, Heather, Nancy Nelson, Marcia Rasmussen, and I met with Stuart Sagamore because of questions that had been raised about the Right Tavern project. And in summary, and I'll try to do this as efficiently as possible, there are historical problems with the applications that promise or suggest. Now, this is historically, this is Stuart addressing things from a CPC perspective. And he says there are historical problems within the CPC projects. And he gave us several examples with applications that promise or suggest their project will be focused on public use and perhaps the exhibition of historical artifacts in the future. This is often a more expensive undertaking than anticipated by the planners, specifically from interior systems to the support and use, for instance, HVAC and fire suppression systems that would vary depending upon whether this is a public use or whether it is a private use area. And therefore, such plans are often, in his experience, not fulfilled. And he gave us several dramatic examples. So in the absence of very specific plans for the future use and treatment, this project has some problems that we need to hear from them and address. Number two is without an existing preservation restriction on record, it is difficult to proceed. It is clearly the intention of the Right Tavern's trustees to have such a document, but it often takes much longer to consummate such a document, he explained, than imagined. A preservation restriction ensures that the public's investment will be protected if the building is sold or leased and or if there is a change in treatment or use that would compromise the historic qualities of the building. Many town CPCs require preservation restrictions as the first step toward the actual funding toward funding and the actual work in a future cycle. A draft PR developed in consultation with the Right Tavern's highly qualified preservation consultants would help. If the draft preservation restriction were done prior to the finalizations of plans for the rehab work. Number three, he said, most CPC committees, and this was rather startling to hear, would not grant additional funding and monies when the previous resources have not yet been used. The intention of the applicant is to use the monies as they progress. That's been very clear in their presentation to us. But the wiser course of action, he said, might be to ask them to reapply a year from now when the 2021 funds have been spent and when clear treatment plans are available and the public purpose is specific. I ask about the question about a contingency. Is it possible that a contingency fund might be established, a sort of bridge, not the full $260,000 being requested, but a funding that would give them access to some money once they fulfilled certain obligations. Note, earmarking contingency funds takes away CPC's ability to fund other CPC projects for one or more cycles, not only the historic preservation category, but for others. So that's I think, an accurate summary. I shared this with the people who were present at that meeting, and they seemed to feel that that was an accurate summary of their work and their study. Subsequently, we have also received from the Right Tavern folks, yet again, another terrific Right Tavern funding request summary that speaks directly to what they hope to spend from our first round of funding and how they hope to use the second round of funding. So having begun with this, I think because it is the most pressing application in our bunch before we make an overall set of recommendations, I'd like to hear responses, please, to those documents and to your considerations and thinking. Thank you. Paul, would you like to start? Thank you.
Just a question on your first comment on the, I guess, the public use of a historical property, that being, making for a more expensive renovation. Is it possible in this instance to kind of separate of a true historic preservation versus a public use? And is that a worthwhile, is that a worthwhile endeavor?
Heather, could you address that for us?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? There was background noise going on and I did not hear.
So the first comment was that the expense of a project, if it's intended for public use, it adds expense as opposed to the pure historic preservation, fix the roof, fix the beams, make sure the structure is intact. Is it possible to separate those two cost-wise, those costs that are related to the historic preservation of the structure versus those intended for the future public use? And if so, is that a worthwhile thing to discuss amongst ourselves and or the applicant?
I think that's something that could be discussed. And I think that's similar to like last year's funding was for structural repairs to the building that would support the building and keep it standing. And the public benefit to that is that this historic structure is still standing in the center of town. When we get into like the interior and wiring and that sort of thing, that's where there's kind of blurred lines of the public benefit that we need to discuss.
Does that help, Paul?
It does. I'm just, I don't know if it's one and the same project that can't be separated, or it's possible to think of them on two tracks. And if not, I'll just kind of cease speaking at this point.
Well, I think Tom and then Nancy.
Isn't that what the first request was for, though, was for addressing the most urgent structural needs, and this second request is for finishing out the structure on the first and the second floor to fulfill the vision, which I think they've said before, but is that still correct?
I believe so, yes. Tom.
Well, I think I agree with what Nancy's saying, that I think in this most recent exhibit that they have provided us, I mean, it does itemize the use of the monies, and I think we're still dealing with the historic structure, not funding program. So I mean, we can obviously, as maybe as Heather mentioned, there's a blurred boundary. Maybe we can talk about fire protection systems, but it seems to me that that would be worth maybe some additional discussion. And then in terms of the memo number 3, it says, but the wiser course of action might be asked them to reapply a year from now. And I think a reasonable discussion would be, isn't that what we've done? They came to us for 500. We asked them to basically split it in 2 pieces. They've done that. And they've now itemized what the monies will be used for in the rather linear way that they'll be expending the money. So it seems like, I appreciate Stuart's recommendation here, and it seems like that's the path that we're on.
Thank you, Tom. Do I hear other comments? John?
Just with respect to number 3, historically, we've made a number of grants where the money was not fully used in the first year. So we've been working, I think, differently than that strict rule. So I wouldn't feel confined on that rule, at least in terms of historical work of this committee.
So you would not feel constrained by the fact that that the first funding has yet to be spent?
Not at all.
Okay, thank you, John. Other comments, please, from committee members? It's really important that people speak up about this, because this is going to be an important part of our deliberations, in fact, central to our deliberations tonight. So I really like, as often as possible, to hear from everybody. Nancy?
I wish other people would speak up. I think the commission knows what I think. The committee knows what I think. I think we funded the basic work that was presented to us as the most urgent, and that the second phase request is for rounding out the work that would support the vision, which is still very unclear to me. We have no real clear understanding of where they're going after the building is stabilized and it's more secure. And the building was used extensively for classrooms for a couple of years. So I'm always been mystified by the fact that it was under such duress, the building was under such duress, and I would rather see the structural work clearly completed. That's
Thank
all.
you. Thank you very much. Peter, and then Sarah.
So I just wanted to first reinforce a point that John made. I know we've looked at other projects like the Emerson Field improvements, and we did fund that project over multiple years. So in fact, year 1 was put to the bank until additional funds could be raised. But I guess getting back to the project itself, I'm clearly a novice at much of this, either from an architectural perspective or a preservation perspective. But it seems that this preservation restriction is a really big deal. And it seems to be looming larger and larger as we learn more and more about it. So I think the applicant has a lot of work in front of them to do to get, or I sense they have a lot of work to do to get their hands around this. And I guess I'm also just thinking about the fact that little, if any, of the work has taken place thus far based on funding from last year. And it just seems as if there's a lot in front of the applicant to get this project moving. It's a very important project, but there just seems to be a number of issues that are surfacing here, and certainly well encapsulated in this memo from the meeting that you all had with Stuart. So I guess I don't have an opinion one way or the other. It just seems as if this project has a lot in front of it.
Thank you, Peter. Sarah?
Please could you remind me, so the preservation restriction, the advice was, many committees wait until that's in place. Could somebody remind me at what point that will be in place? Because I'm wondering if we could I like the idea of a contingency fund, but maybe it could be, you know, until that preservation restriction is in place.
Perhaps we would segue for just a minute to ask Rosalind and John and Tom, who are present, and thank you both very much for once again being with us. Do you know when the preservation restriction, does either of you know when that preservation restriction will be drafted and able to be presented? Tom, you're muted. If you're speaking, we're not hearing you. Tom, we can't hear you. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh, we
we
can
can.
hear. Tom's there now.
Oh, here, okay.
Thanks, Rosalind.
I was trying to find where my mute button was because I was looking at another file that actually we presented to the CHC last week, a schedule that gets exactly where the PR will be developed. The agreement that we understand we're working from on the 2021 agreement was that it would be delivered at the time before we provide to you all and to them the plans and specifications for what we're going to be doing to the building. And so that we are anticipating to be in the I'll call it April, probably more May or June, maybe April, May, June timeframe. So the emphasis of so we would have that both a draft of the whole document for you to look at in advance of those plans. The problem with the struggle we've been having with the PR is that this is a bit of a chicken and an egg. We need to know exactly what is historical and what's worth saving and be very detailed about that in order to make sure we are meeting the restrictions needed under a PR. So we can't really do that now until we know what those points are. And so that's what our commitment and our commitment of 2021, our plan was, or is, not was, it is that we would have that to you as we develop these plans. Part of the methodology of developing the plans is doing an inventory of all the historical elements of the building. All of that then would be shared with you. The list of the things that are historical and the timing and what's important, what's not, kind of some sort of stratification of those. The plans that we're going to be doing, what we want to do in terms of building itself, particularly, not just for the structural things that we talked about before, but really some of the more, what the use of the building, and then the schedule for how that would all be happened. If you look at the document we sent you in terms of the thing that Diane mentioned, slightly less, about $100,000 of the 260 is for planning purposes. And that's what we see doing over the next really 6 months between now and be able to get with the architects, get with the, working with historic architects, doing the documentation, figuring out all the plans. And we're in the process right now, and I mentioned it as some reference of focusing in on a preservation architect. And I got agreement this afternoon that it was okay to share their name. Although we don't have an agreement right now, they're the ones that we have selected, and now we're working through an agreement, and it's with the Spencer Preservation Group. Lynn Spencer in particular is the one we'd be working with. And I very much believe, just kind of what we have talked about so far, we're going to reach an agreement with them, her in particular, but her firm, to take over and be the project leader for this effort. Which is what we haven't really had a good, strong, solid historical architect in charge. We've had Larry Sorley, who's actually on the call as well, working with us as we've been looking at the parts to make sure that anything we do is not going to damage any kind of important historical fabric in the building. And so this is the measure twice, cut once. So the answer to your question, going back to what I'm saying earlier, is that we're moving towards this plan over the next really 6 months to get those plans in place, document what's historical. Now we have something to talk about with what the PR is going to look like. And I understand that the 2021 agreement is that, if we deliver that before we deliver the plans, we're meeting our commitment. if we start doing a bunch of changes to the building, that's not meeting our commitment to you. And the PR needs to be, and I agree with you, it's a very important protection instrument. We want that to be done in a way that is, that does capture and reinforce the important historical elements of the building. We want to do it in a way that makes sense. We've also contracted with an attorney that can help us and help you all to figure out what is really important. How do we reach agreements on those kinds of things? I'm not an attorney, so I'm trying to get advice from people to do that. And this particular firm also specializes in developing preservation restriction documents. So I feel like we're getting the team together. If you think about that, is we're getting the team to put the plans together, in the team in terms of the PR together, and get the timing together. And so our emphasis and the principle of the funding that we requested is really a good chunk relative to the planning, and the other part is some contingencies if we are running over relative to the original 260 and things that we're doing. And I could respond more to other questions, but I'll just stop now. And sort of that's the path forward for us. That's what the path we're working on. Is that I didn't see the document y'all are referring to, so I don't have all the.
I probably should have sent it to you and Rosalind. I was waiting. It's all happened, over the Martin Luther King kind of fast period. So I will send you a copy, but I mean, it's nothing more than just what Stuart Sagamore says about the history of how CPC operations, perform. I was quite surprised by the strictures of other CPC programs, and it ends up that we have been, and I think John's right, we have been a little more relaxed about those here in Concord. So I mean, it produces some complexity. Rosalind?
I want to add to something Tom said, but I also want to speak back to something that that has been said in this meeting already. I want to make clear that in case it isn't obvious, our agreement went into effect in the middle of September. That is 4 months ago. And in the middle of those 4 months, or toward the end of those 4 months, was the Christmas holiday. So if you said that we've been active with the finances for a mere 3.5 months, we have been extremely active. It is not the case that the work is not being done. It is only the case that we are being very careful with the cash flow. The fact that you have not received bills yet is a sign of very good management. And I mean this very sincerely. We started with September, October, November, December with volunteer meetings that were not on the books, were not billed. And with historic preservation architects, historic landscape preservation architects, many people with very goodwill, with great goodwill and with great caring for this building, who volunteered their time or used their initial times, like the structural engineer, the demolition engineer, who put time in October, November, but in December, but there was no opportunity for sending you massive big bills. We told you at the last meeting that some of those are coming and that money will be spent. But just in the time since the December meeting, which is only several weeks, and with a holiday in the middle, the surgical demolition is complete and was almost non-existent. All of the scaffolding and the safety precautions that needed to be put in place in the roof, in the attic, above the third floor, not the second floor, above the third floor, between the third floor and the roof, have been put in place. The engineer has been taking photographs, has been taking care of documentation. We are preparing very carefully. When Tom talks about planning, what he's talking about is being very, very careful from a historic preservation point of view about the existing conditions, the potential repairs that need to be made. We've been extremely thoughtful here, and we've been very active. It is not the case that nothing's happened. It's just the case that you haven't received a bill for it yet. And sorry to sound tough here, but really,
I don't think, Rosalind, anyone has accused, and no one has meant to. If anything,
we just heard that. We just heard the words, "Nothing's been done."
Well,
That's not fair.
Well,
We did not know that anything had been done in terms of the exploratory.
That is not,
work.
Nancy, that's not true.
When
We've
did you-
shared that
when
at the
did you-
HCH meetings. We've shared that at,
You said
we
that
shared
work
this.
was underway. I certainly don't recall hearing that. And it
I'm
would have
sorry
been
you
nice
didn't hear
to
it,
know.
but it's absolutely been in our presentations, and at our last meeting, we shared that it was happening in January. It's coming up in February, and I'm sorry to sound
That the work,
stern, but
that the work
really,
was underway.
yes, we shared
I
this at
don't
the
think I
HCH.
knew.
You were in the CHC meeting, Nancy, when we
I
spoke about it.
was, absolutely, and I don't recall that.
It's in
I'm
the
sorry.
presentations. These are in the presentations that we've been sharing with you as well. So
Okay.
all I'm trying to say is that we are trying very hard to be responsible to the town of Concord that has forwarded so much funding.
I
to
don't
us.
think anyone doubts, at least I don't think anybody here on the committee or anyone else doubts the sincerity of the efforts that you're trying to undertake. Our meeting was.
It's the integrity of the efforts that we're talking about, Diane.
No, I think what we're talking about, Rosalind, and that's the reason, for this, the meeting with Stuart, is that we're trying to understand what the constraints are on CPC funding. What is it that a CPC committee can and cannot do? How does it work? What are the expectations? I mean, no, I know, I think I speak for all of us when I say that no one doubts the integrity of your undertaking, not even for a nanosecond. I mean, I think it's just that, communication is always at the heart of things, isn't it? And, how we communicate and how we, parse these things is always reasonably, sensitive and complicated. Burton, and then Paul.
Thank you, Diane. Looking at the memo that was circulated, it's the second one that jumps out at me regarding the preservation restriction. And it certainly seemed to me that we could have as a condition of approval the creation and registration of that restriction. And I'm really getting this sense, and maybe Nancy, you could speak. I don't have any experience with the things, but it's clear when we talk about working with a preservation architect and a lawyer specialized in these things, that I presume it's a very bespoke restriction that's specific to the building and describing what maybe historical elements would be preserved, and then what the long-term use would be. And that maybe goes a little bit to the first point of the memo as well. And I am hesitant to say, let's fund this and subject to the completion of the restriction, because I think that the board would want to know what that restriction looks like. And I also, because of the complexity, and it's not a check the box exercise, I'm hesitant to leave that to a future board to take on the responsibility of this board to view that. And by future board, I mean, as it's constituted next year or whenever. Setting up a commitment that they then need to look at that restriction. I feel like if we had a draft restriction that was 99% of the way there, that it captured the intent of what the use would be and what elements would be preserved, that might be something that we could say, okay, once this is finalized, the filing of this would be a prerequisite to our funding. But as it is, I don't yet have, unfortunately, a clear picture of what that is. And Nancy, if you want to speak to what you think might look like a preservation restriction, I have no idea. I've never read one.
Lucky you. I think there were very good models that the Historical Commission could have shared with Wright Tavern folks over a year ago. I think their historic architect and the other guy, who I forget what his professional title is exactly, is a conservator, I think. But the historical architect has had experience developing preservation restrictions. This committee funded a historic structures report that the other consultant did a long time ago, which would have identified specific things in the building that were important to preserve. It would have been easy to put, that's the crux of a preservation restriction, is identifying those things which should be dealt with carefully. The Secretary's standards, which I think have not been well understood by many people, and I can understand why, allow for rehabilitation, but also require that it be done in a very careful way, that you know what your resource is, and it's documented, for instance, in a preservation restriction, and you know what the ultimate use of the building will be. You know what's going to be public. You know what's going to be for commercial office space. It's been stated that the Wright Tavern Legacy Trust needs to work out with the church what they need to do in terms of the funding they give it. But
Can I ask one?
that's another topic.
So
Sorry.
to ask one question about it, what I'm wondering is a preservation restriction just simply whatever it is the desire of the party that's filing the restriction to say, or is there a standard to which it meets? So it needs to meet. So in other words, could we say you're responsible for placing a preservation restriction on the property that meets XYZ standard, and then we can move on? That seems to be more of a check the box exercise, so long as a professional says it meets the standard, versus, hey, there's no such thing as a standard preservation restriction. It's all in the eye of the beholder. We'd like to see it before granting the funding.
I think it's more technically specific than that. And you would have an historic architect and a preservation conservator, both of whom are on the team, who could tell you in a professional way what things to look at. There's been a lot, as Tom and Rosalind have said, there's been a lot of change in the building over time.
Yeah.
So rehabilitation allows for different uses and so on and so forth. But first you have to know what things you're really protecting, and they already have a lot of information about that. So I was actually hoping that the draft preservation restriction would come together before, well before that first set of work was done, that would address the very critical structural deficiencies of the building. So.
And I have to say that that's what Stuart Sagamore said as well, for the committee, is that usually what precedes any of these things is the preservation restriction study. And I think it's fair to say that this has been an evolving process for the Wright Tavern folks, and they've been doing the learning curve has been profound for them, and probably for our committee as well. I want to get to Paul and Charles, but before I do, Heather.
I just wanted to answer Burton's question as well. Preservation restrictions are generally pretty specific. They'll call out specific beams in a certain room, floorboards, baseboards, mantles. So they can be pretty specific.
Windows.
And tailored to an individual structure.
Thank you, Heather.
It's in the absence of being able to see one that one wonders, how one goes forward with the funding, Burton, I think seems to be at the heart of so much of what we're discussing. Paul, and then Charles, and then thank you, Heather, and then John.
Yeah, hi, question for Tom. Tom, you mentioned earlier about your approaching the agreement with Spencer Preservation. My understanding of the purpose of that agreement is for them to help you develop this preservation document, correct? And secondly, to overall manage the project. Are those the two roles of them? That's part A of my question related to Spencer Preservation. Yeah.
Answer question is yes, is exactly right. And just one thing, and then when to Burton, we have an agreement now with you all to make sure we have a preservation restriction agreement. So that's a commitment. We don't need. I mean, you could add it to another element, and that's fine. But we have an agreement to do that, and I can share with you kind of the time frame that we have set for that. So the requirement of Spencer Preservation, and also working with Larry Sorley as well, is to document what is historic. Looking at the 2014 historic structures report, and a lot of things that have gone on since then, and we look at that building and look at what is it, and document both the timing and importance of the various elements. And then that gives us something, as Heather was saying, that says, okay, in room 101, there's a mantle that we want to do in the cabinets here, but this trim around whatever is not important because that was put in 1925. And so it allows us to have those kinds of discussions. And I think I see this as an agreement process where we lay out all of these various elements, And it goes in concert with what we're planning to do with the building. So you got to put those two things together so we can say, well, in room 102, we want to make sure that we retain the molding on the floor, the baseboard of the floor, but not in the ceiling, because that was put in and whatever. And that's, but we're going to turn it, we're going to paint the color X this, so we're going to do that kind of. So it's those kinds of things that I think that's basically in our work plan to do that. And we have agreement to develop a PR, because that's, we have to do this, we want to do this. We just want to do it right, because the preservation restriction documents that I've read, and Heather actually sent me one, and I've looked at several others, they're very detailed. And I think it's important to get detail as opposed to general, because in general, then you get a lot of generations of people saying, well, wait a minute, that's not what we meant. And I'd rather say, so hope that's helpful.
Yeah,
So
Tom,
Tom,
yeah,
Tom,
go ahead. Go ahead.
is Spencer's role, I think you mentioned project management, is their role also to manage the overall project?
That's yes. Because right now we've had some structural engineers, we've had other folks, so we see them as putting them right at the center to run this project. I am not, and we're active in this thing, but we are not experts in the preservation and in the construction and in the architecture work, and that's what we want to put in place. Somebody really is the project leader for this whole thing.
So my last question on this, and looking at your budget spreadsheet, thank you for providing it. I didn't see Spencer preservation being called out or project management being called out. That you have 102,000 for professional services, but are they in there, or is that something?
For the first, not much has happened for 2022 dollars, some in 21, 22 dollars. And we're gonna need probably more dollars. So there's a phase 3 in funding that we sort of talked about, that's in that document. We didn't want to put them in paper yet because we don't have an agreement yet. We don't have to sign a contract with them. So we put a budget in there, and we're waiting to what we see as their budget. They're going to come back with. We can negotiate, come to an agreement, and then we'll figure out what other adjustments we have to make in order to meet their commitment. But our estimate was, when I tested it for a number of people, it's probably a reasonable estimate for what we're asking to do, because we're asking to really, at this point, to give us the planning and designs but the project management of actually all the implementation probably will be another funding source, another phase, a phase 3 of this thing.
But do you think their cost in phase 2 is covered in the budget you already have?
Yeah, well, there's a cost, so there's a whole nother category of things which we have like $500,000, and that is for anything we want to do, that's going to be, I'll call it cosmetic or that's related to the use of the building, independent of the infrastructure, if that makes sense. So a cost, if you will, if they want to do a subcontractor around certain electrical things you want to put phase or technology or video displays or whatever else, that's in a category which we're calling sort of the interior design work. So we're trying to get, this is it's always a complicated process, because we want to get them to give us a proposal that has a dollar associated with it, and a scope of work that is going to look at getting us to a point where we all have agreement. This is what we want to do with the building, and this is what it's going to cost us to do that. And then we'll see what we have funding for that, and what additional funding, which expect to be over $1 million, independent of what work the CPC is giving us to bring the building to the place that we want it to be. Is that helpful, Paul?
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope that's covered.
Okay, thank you, Charles.
Yes, just first of all, who is Stuart Saginaw? I have not heard his name before. In what's his role or expertise?
In the document that we talked about at the last meeting, I hope we clarified this. I'm so sorry, Charles. Stuart Sagamore is the executive director of the CPC on a state level. He's the one that really knows of how the CPC functions.
Okay. And
he first advised us when we were talking about the Assabet land acquisition, because he's a real pro in that world. So.
Okay. Well, I guess my opinion really here is that that we do need to provide some funding in the second phase to the group. Maybe not all that they requested for, because the work is underway. They don't want to come to next July and suddenly find they don't have any more funds. And I think they need it. They need that extra funding in order to be assured that they can continue to develop the program, develop all of these aspects that everyone has been talking about. So that's my opinion on terms of the funding.
Thank you, Charles, very much. I think John is next, and then Peter.
Yeah, I think Burton has made a useful contribution, and I think it's more constructive as we try to get this resolved, not to look backwards and keep kind of visiting what did happen and might not have happened and could have happened, and focus on the conservation restriction, the commitment that they've made to it, establish our view that it's a condition of future funding. I had, several meetings ago suggested you think of this in two parts. Are we satisfied with the conservation restriction, and do we need a condition to make sure we're satisfied? And then what is the funds needed for the next grant? And I think, listening to Tom, it is appropriately continuing what they're, and I meant Tom Kearns. It's appropriately continuing what they're doing now. So that's my view, that we try, especially in a consensus way, which we've always done in the past, to see if we can't get this conservation restriction guaranteed, and then figure out what's the useful money that fits what they're doing.
Thank you, John. I would just, yeah, Peter, go ahead.
So I had a follow-up question for Tom. I'm looking at the spreadsheet for phase 1 and phase 2. Are there any funds within phase 1 that could be used to move this process forward as to the preservation restriction, or would that effort require the funding for the second phase to initiate that?
It's a good question, Peter. Here's a question for you all in terms of process. How locked in are the dollars that we had agreed to? Because originally those dollars were set aside to deal with lolly columns and looking at the roof and the roof pairs and all that stuff. Really about structural kinds of things. If there's dollars available that we could use to really expedite the inventory of the historical characters and reach an agreement, I kind of expected it to be in phase 2 funding, but if we can move dollars around, I really hear you all's important that how important that having this agreement, before we really get too far ahead of ourselves, and have that really locked in, secured, so that any concerns about the historic preservations of the character of the building is well established, and we have that guarantee. So if we have a flexibility to move some dollars around as opposed to just in the categories, absolutely.
Does that answer your question, Peter?
Yeah, because I do see some dollars under professional service fees.
Right.
In phase 1, I think it's for historical preservation advisors and preservation design and building architects, and just didn't know if part of those funds could be used to start funding the process for the preservation restriction.
Yeah. I think so. If I could share one slide real quickly because it kind of lays out what I presented to the CHC that lays out that plan, just so you can see it visually and the timing. Would that be okay?
That would be lovely.
I can do it really quickly here. So what we told the CHC, because they're involved in this as well, and so we see both of you all kind of as our customers, if you will. the steps that we see is doing some research about what our best practices, how are these things put together, how does this all work? We need to identify, the historical elements that are in the building. So we've already started doing that. We've got some documentation of things that were in the attic, some things that were in the basement, but we really need to look at the second floor in particular, and the first floor in particular. So we see that really starting in earnest, particularly if how quickly we can get an agreement with Spencer, and have that done by the first part of March. So that's really a February effort, because I don't think it's not that big. It's just making sure we have the right documentation. At the same time, we're building a plan. So what we want to do with the buildings, the plans and call specifications. Then we need to put those two things together. Step 4 is putting the elements and the plans together to say, here's what we're going to finalize in the plans and the historical preservations. And if you notice, and then the finalizing the language and agreement in the preservation restriction would occur during this time. So the plans would not be completely finished until we've actually reached an agreement to some level with the PR. And then we've got our plans in place. We can finish finalizing the legal jargon that's needed in the document itself, and then move forward and give it to the secretary and the master historical secretary that looks at this issue of and to the town council and all the various filings we have to do for the document itself. So it's sort of in sync with, if you will, the planning process. And then
Thank you. I have a very naive question, Tom, but here it goes. Ready? If I were trying to, this is not pro or con anything, it really is authentically innocent question. If I were trying to build a house and I was trying to figure out my funding and how much money I had to build the house and things, I think I'd need an architectural plan or vision, to start with, so that I would know kind of what are the parameters, what are the constraints, what am I going to do? Is it going to be bigger? Is it going to be smaller? Am I going to be encroaching on the neighbor's property? What are the other things that, that will constrain or, expand what my imagination. And of course, I want the biggest kitchen in possible. And my husband is saying, no, I want a library. So, I mean, we're going back and forth on this discussion and we're trying to work it out. And that seems to me in kind of layman terms, what a preservation restriction in some ways is. It's giving you a sense for, what is this project going to look like? And I think that one of the problems that people on the committee are having, if I can speak, just in general, is that we don't really know, without having that preservation restriction in hand. It's hard to kind of go ahead and say, well, here's a lot of money. We hope you do well, because we don't know what the building is going to look like. So it's kind of as you so wisely said, it's chicken and egg. But right now we don't have the chicken or the egg.
Right. Well, you have a chicken and an egg, but they're still in the hen house.
Thank you. That's a better way to put it. And we know what your sentiment is. I mean, it could not be more authentic and sincere.
Yeah, I know, and I appreciate it.
That is not at all the question. It's just, I think that's what we're grappling with. Nancy, Nancy, you had a comment?
I just, I don't know what this project is going to look like. I don't think we know what we're funding at this point.
Right.
And can I say, Rosalind, you and I should have a conversation, because I don't find that announcement in the presentation to the Historical Commission. So we'll take that offline.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I would like to open this for public comment for a moment, and I see Mr. Sorley. And could you tell us your address and your and et cetera, please?
Sorry, it's my name is Larry Sorley. I live in Carlisle. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about the preservation restriction versus design of the spaces. The preservation restriction should not be looking at what the White Tavern wants to do with the building.
Mr.
They
Sorley,
basically,
excuse me, I'm sorry, could you explain your background and your interest in this
oh,
project?
I'm a historical architect. I'm a consultant to the White Tavern people. I've worked on many projects in Concord.
I know.
was
I
there.
make sure the
All right.
audience knows. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
So I just want to make it clear that, this house has basically 8 rooms, and 4 of them have a lot of value to them historically. We all talk about what's historic in the building. Well, you can say that later adaptations could be historic. You could say that, outfitting the building for an architectural office at some point is going to have historical significance. So what I would do is I would, just to clear this up, I take a look at what the important periods of the house. And, the Wright Tavern is very interested in the 1774 to 1775 period. However, there's very little left in the building on the inside for that period. And those remnants of that period are mainly in these 4 rooms, 2 on the first floor, 2 on the second floor that, face Lexington Street. The back part of the house was pretty much gutted in the early 19th century by Francis Jarvis, who, when the tavern stopped operating, he converted it to a home. And it was totally residential, except for his bake shop, which was in the wing and in the basement. So, and then, you spoke a little bit about, you want to know what the architects want to do. Well, all the programs will be in these back rooms that have been so denatured over time that there isn't much more you can do to make it worse. There are a few, I would put a secondary importance on Jarvis's changes to the house, where he basically ripped out the, I'm sorry, I have this thing that my face. He ripped out, there was a second central fireplace.
Yeah.
There was another central chimney in the house with 4 other fireplaces that served the back 4 rooms on 2 floors. And that was totally ripped out, and he put in 2 new chimneys with new mantles, which are federal style, on the south end of the building. So that has nothing to do with the period of significance of the Revolution. That's a later period, and it has interest. So that would have a secondary importance for character defining features in a preservation restriction document. That go as far as you can, save these other important elements that have significance as architectural style of the federal period, but certainly not significance in terms of the Revolution and how the building functioned then. So I don't think you need to worry about what comes first, the chicken or the egg. I think the preservation restrictions are going to be pretty obvious. And I think that, the work that's being done now, we're carefully making sure that nothing's going to be destroyed that's important. The structural work in the attic is very tricky, because that is the most severe structural problem in the house. There are 4 posts in the attic that are coming down onto basically nothing and would puncture through the ceiling.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I know Nancy is concerned about saving, the partitions in the attic. I would too, if you could, but unfortunately, in order to preserve what's on the second floor, we need to do a lot of structural work, adding beams in the second floor, the attic floor above the ceiling of the second floor rooms, so that none of those rooms will be affected. And even though the second floor won't be open to the public, there's still important features in the ceiling, beams that are exposed and encased and that kind of thing. So, I hope that answers your question about that. I don't think there's an issue of what comes first. And I think, once the preservation restrictions are in place, I'll be watching the project as they proceed with the structural enhancements to make sure that none of those are affected. But going forward, they pretty much have carte blanche to do what they want in these rooms that are already been stripped of anything historic, including that back addition, which is early 20th century with all the windows.
Right.
I think that was put on as a dining room, but that's a room that could be open to the public for various functions. So the Wright Tavern, they'll have exhibit designers. I think it's pretty clear what they want to do. It's going to be educational. It's not going to be a restoration, because there's nothing to restore. We don't have the evidence of what it was exactly. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on the whole thing.
Thank you very much. That's instructive and helpful. I'm sure I know we all, I think I speak for the committee in saying we appreciate that comment. Are there other public comments from anybody who's observing or part of this discussion? Okay, thank you, Mr. Sorley, very much. And going forward, we now have to make some decisions about funding and money. So let's roll up our sleeves and do this. I want to just remind the committee that we can put a restriction on the money and say, a condition. And we say, well, this money would be forthcoming when and if we receive, a preservation restriction, da, 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 da. And so that's an important part of the deliberations. Heather, can you remind us where we are financially in terms of shortfall?
Just give me 1 second and I will pull that.
Okay. While she's doing that, we have essentially agreed on the full funding of requests for all projects but 2. And the one is the Right Tavern, and the other, which has evoked a certain amount of conversation, has been the Concord Home for the Aged on Walden Street. And their request is for $150,000. And we have not settled yet on how much of that, for a variety of reasons, the committee wishes to fund. So I think let's start with that for just a minute. Presuming that, and I'm going to make a suggestion, and let's see if it works for the committee. Presuming that all other funding is accepted, and that we're going to fully fund everything, and now we're down to 2 projects that we're considering. Now, there was an alternative recommendation by Tom King that we take a little bit out of here and a little bit out of there and a little bit out of here and a little bit out of there, and that we balance our budget accordingly. John, is your hand up to speak?
My hand's up because I had a question about, I'm sorry, yeah, you can hear me. A question about the numbers.
Okay.
And is the total 2153, or is
the money that in the most recent document that I received is 2153741.
Yeah, okay. I think I'm all set. I had thought I'd seen a different number, but I don't now. Thank you.
Okay. So
Diane, just to clarify,
yes,
the sum of those 2 projects that we have 0 right now, if we were to fully fund them, that'd be 410,000. But yet we have 370,000, so we have a $40,000 shortfall.
Right.
From total funding. Okay, just want to make sure.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask Heather next to speak to that, Paul. So Heather, we are shy how much money?
$40,600.
$40,600. Okay. So I'd like to hear discussion about the Concord Home for the Aged for a minute first, please. Wait, I want to make sure that are we agreed that we're going to stick with full funding for all but these last 2 projects, which are the only 2 which have evoked so far deliberations that suggest perhaps full funding is not in order right now. Or do we want to turn to we'll call it the Tom Kearns model, which is to take a little bit out of this and a little bit out of that and cobble together a result. And so let's hear how we feel about this. Paul.
I think the Tom Kearns model, assuming we want to fully fund just about everything, would be fine, but that would take a sort of an equal percentage out of each project. I mean,
right.
You wouldn't want to take a disproportionate amount out of a small project. And so, yeah, I mean, we could have a few percent reduction of every project here and probably call it a day.
And you're in favor of that approach, Paul? Or you're
assume? Well, we still haven't discussed the full funding of Right Tavern yet. I mean, assume, but we haven't discussed these 2 projects, so maybe let's go through those. But
that's what I just wanted to make sure that we knew that Tom's proposal as an alternative way of approaching this is out there. Tom, since it's your proposal, can you
well, I guess, thank you, Diane. But obviously proposals and my thinking evolves, but what I also discussed last time, I mean, I would be comfortable with a discussion with regard to other options here. I had, we discussed the Assabet River Bridge, pedestrian bridge, which I think is you know, in some ways a similar request, no further developed than the Wright Tavern is. And I would consider making a reduction there. And, you know, that's at least one. So I know that there's a matching issue there, but I think that that's still many, many years in the making, where Wright Tavern feels rather imminent to me. So I think that given that bridge, which is probably 3 to 5 to 7 years out, I would reduce that, but consider that reduction in favor of getting Wright Tavern done.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tom. Sarah.
I think it's important that there's a matching issue with the Assabet River, and that some of the other programs would struggle if we didn't fund them fully. So I'm actually not in favor of the Kearns approach.
Okay. Okay. Paul, is your hand still up because you wish to address this issue, or have you just not lowered it?
It's lower now.
Okay, thank you very much. Nancy.
Oh, whoops. Oh, good. I'm unmuted. I'm not in favor of the across the board cuts, because I think in contrast to what Tom was saying, I was very convinced by the project demands on the Assabet River Bridge in terms of how it would be proceeding through the process to come to fruition. So I would hate to see that that project cut. And I still think the Home for the Aged, I think this committee has many times referred to what a wonderful process was followed there. And I will remind folks that they had good guidance all along from historic structures reports and the oversight and participation of architects who were familiar with the historic preservation process. So I think as a model that was put in place before I was on the commission is one that I agree with, even though I didn't always understand quite the attachment. So I think that project, I would like to see that fully funded.
You've allowed us to segue right into that project, Nancy. So let's continue the discussion for a minute. Would you like to make a motion to fully fund that project? And then let us discuss it, please.
I would. Yes, I make a motion that we fully fund the Timothy Wheeler Home for the Aged.
May I hear a second to that motion, please?
I would second that.
Thank you very much, Peter. All right, going forward, maybe we have a discussion of that, please.
Could I ask a question?
Sure, John, of course, anything. That's what a discussion is. Go do it.
Just if we do that, that leaves the Wright Tavern, am I correct? Would leave the Wright Tavern at 210 at its max?
Yes, it would leave the Wright Tavern at 210 at its max.
Oh,
220.
and I forgot one thing. The other reason that I wasn't in favor of this across the board cut is because I think we should consider whether or not we want to leave anything in reserve. I know that was something in past years that we thought was important.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Yes, John, that is
I will just say I would only support that 150 with the full 210 for the Wright Tavern.
Okay.
What would we be funding would be my question.
Yeah, but let's not go there yet.
We're not there yet. I know that.
Let's focus on the Home for the Aged. I think we all know it's an admirable project that they have been extremely scrupulous in their presentations and forthright, that it sits in the center of Concord for those who have not been part of this discussion in the past, and that it's an admirable project. Paul, and I think that I should also say that Burton spoke exquisitely the last time to how reasonable it is as a place for our gracefully aging population. Paul.
Yeah, so I think that's a very worthwhile, well-managed project. I'll just reiterate my singular concern is that they have applied their own assets at various times to this project. And it has varied over a year, over several years. And I think there are assets to apply. If we needed money, I think we'd say, please apply more of your own assets, $10,000, $20,000. But to John's point, I would withdraw that comment. If we should fully fund this, if we're in agreement that we should use all the funds, and if we're in agreement that Wright Tavern deserves 210, then I would withdraw that comment on the use of their own funds.
Thank you, Paul. That's a very thorough and understand and helpful conversation. Thank you so much. Do I hear other comments on this particular project? Hearing none, I would, I can't see everybody right now, but would people, thank you, Heather. Can people indicate aye or nay to go ahead and fully funding the Concord Home for the Aging? We're not going to take a roll call, but could you just wave your hand or do something so I can see if you feel that we ought to fully fund that?
Well, it's a risky vote, hoping that I get some support on the Wright Tavern.
Yeah, I agree with John.
Yeah,
I think it needs context.
I would agree as well.
Okay, so do we skip now? Is your preference now to go to the Wright Tavern discourse, putting this one on hold? I can't, if we're going to say 210, that's it. We're there, guys. We've got the amount of money. And whether we fund that or not, John, it seems to me it has nothing to do with the Wright Tavern. If we support it fully, then we're not going to be affecting anything actually, except a slight reduction in the funding for the Wright Tavern project, which some would see as still a generous gift and others would see as insufficient. So that's so can I just see a quick kind of show of hands of whether you're in general in favor of fully funding the Concord Home for the Aging?
Oh, do we have to take a roll call?
Yeah, well, I'm in favor with my view on the table.
Thank you very much. Burton?
Same as John. Thank you.
Charles?
Aye.
Aye. Nancy?
Aye.
Paul?
I'm in favor of John's proposal.
Thank you. Peter?
I'm the same with John's proposal as well.
Okay.
Are we voting on Wright Tavern or the Home for the Aged?
Yeah, Sarah?
I'm a little confused about what we're voting on, to be honest, at the moment. So,
For the aged.
Sounds like a lot of conditional support.
yes, conditional support.
Which, well, no, some people have said they will support this full funding if Wright Tavern is funded at.
But what if we decided, so what you're saying is if we decided not to fund Wright Tavern at all, we said, nope, sorry, no money, goodbye.
We haven't talked about what level of funding for.
I know that, Hunter. What I'm saying is that if we decided not to fund it at all, we would still have plenty of money to fund this one. And I'm trying to measure sentiment.
That's my point. It's not, it's upsetting that it's some support for full funding. The Home for the Aged is conditioned upon agreement to a high limit in my.
That's your point of view. And I think I feel that that's, yeah. And Tom?
I guess I need maybe a clarification of the Cratsley motion on the table, but the way I would frame it, John, if it's okay for me to do this, and maybe I need support from Heather here. Are we looking for roughly 40,000? So it's $40,000. If it was 10% off the top of the Concord Home for the Aged, it'd be $15,000, and 10% on Wright Tavern, 25,000. That would be your 40. I would be happy. I think both are very deserving. I might split it in even a more refined way with another project or two, but the committee doesn't seem very supportive of that. But I would be satisfied if that, maybe that's an amendment to the.
If I may add, I was thinking exactly the same, Tom, splitting the difference between the two.
What are your numbers, Tom, again?
10% each, so 150 would yield 15,000 and 260 would yield roughly 25, and
And that's roughly 40.
That's my response to the Kratsley concept, I think.
Fine with me.
But
And I would recommend then that we table therefore the Concord Home for the Aged. And Nancy, I'm sorry, did you want to say something? I apologize.
No, I'll wait, sorry.
No, you okay? Okay, Peter, I can't see you. Are you there behind that dark screen? I can't see your face, so I don't know. So then let's move to the Right Tavern, then discussion. Let us hear a proposal. Can somebody make a proposal for the funding of the Right Tavern? Tom, you're on a roll. You want to do this for us?
I just wanted to try to clarify something from the applicant. If I could share my screen for a second. In the latest memo, these 3 items here were included in the grant agreement for the funding last year specifically. I don't know can you guys see this grant agreement that pulled up as well?
Yes.
Okay, so the removal of spalling bricks in the basement, add post and beam, repointing of exterior foundation brick and fieldstone foundation cracks, reinforcement of attic rafters, support ridge beams and annex. So those were all specifically in the grant agreement last year and funded last year. So I'm just wondering why they are not listed as last year's funding in your memo and listed in this year's.
Thank you, Heather. Can we hear from Tom and Rosalind on this?
We did some more analysis about what is critical, and found that the things that we really had to pay more attention to was in the attic, and I wanted to keep the dollars there. So therefore, I wanted to. We thought we were going to need more money in dealing with the roof situation that Larry was talking about, and so I moved it from that category to this category. And so simply trying to figure out how to stay within the 260 we originally have, given the changes a bit, the priorities and what we have. This is back to the question that how locked in are we in each of the line items in terms of their our ability to move things around. So that's to answer your question, Heather. That's what I did with that.
Rosalind?
I'd like to add that I was the person who put together the original financial documents for the 2020 application. Those were based on building and structural engineering reports from 2019. And at the time, we didn't realize, at the time of the production of the 2020 application, we didn't realize how significant the historic fabric considerations were going to be, at least from the initial analysis. It wasn't until we brought Larry and Stephen Mallory, who is the other, quote unquote, the other guy, to look at the state of the building. And at that time, so fundamentally, yes, you are right. It was a mistake to say that some of those items that we put in the 2020 budget we could do immediately. Once we started in on the analysis part, which was the right thing to do, to have historic preservation architects do a deep dive in, we realized that we couldn't make those corrections or repairs to the building without a much more careful and thoughtful analysis on the part of the historic preservation architects. So it does go back. I'm just reinforcing Tom's claim that the new updated budget that you see before you here on Heather's screen is based on a much more based on the recommendations that informed, and also from the recommendations of all of you. It was very good that our work with you last year required that we accelerate the process we already had in place. We were planning on bringing historic preservation architects in. We brought them in sooner to address many of the concerns of that 2020 application. And what we discovered was that our initial plans were a little too premature. So thank you.
very much. Thank you so much. So may I hear, I don't think it's precipitate to ask somebody to make a motion about the Right Tavern expenditures and then a second and discussion. So can I hear a proposal, please, for the funding of Right Tavern? Either Tom or John, if you've been the two that have spoken most specifically.
I move that we fund the Right Tavern at $235,000.
235,000.
35? Oh, not 210? Isn't that what John said?
But what he's doing is suggesting that we take $15,000.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Other.
I'll second it.
Okay, John will second it. Now discussion, please.
I support this.
You do, Sarah. Okay.
Yes.
Peter, how are you on this?
So I'm sorry, this, for the Right Tavern, this would leave how much?
235,000. And then the Concord Home for the Aging minus 15,000 would put it at 135,000, I
There
believe.
needs to be an additional $600 there. We're
Yeah,
short
Heather, we'll need you to-
40,600.
We'll need you to refine the math, Heather.
Oh, okay.
And Diane, can we please just clarify where we are with respect to the preservation restriction? This is on the expectation for the preservation restriction to be in place and
Absolutely.
for the Right Tavern team to come back to us as discussed.
Sarah, I think that's an emendation to the recommendation.
Yeah.
It would be something that we would say it was a condition.
Yes, great.
Of
Just
the
to
fund.
confirm that's still there. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you for that comment. Helpful.
Diane, as a condition though, I'm wondering, Sarah, you may have just said this, but would we be given the opportunity to review that restriction prior to its filing? Right?
I would presume so, Bert.
Yeah. Which is an interesting thing, right? Because
Tom's
we're
saying
going
yes.
to have this approved at town meeting, right? But by numbers, and I suppose, and then presumably that restriction would be provided to us, I'm guessing after town meeting to look at.
You see, that's what I'm worried about, Bert, and I think it needs to be to us before town meeting.
I would think so.
Because
and if it
otherwise,
was-
I mean, how do we say to town meeting in this kind of abstract way? I mean, I think.
Well, more importantly, I think that we wouldn't want to vote on something and then have to I think we would be in a hard position to fairly consider the preservation restriction. If we're looking at this come this summer, the committee has some different people on it who haven't had the benefit of this deliberation, right? And so I think that would be really important. And we could certainly put the funding in our article. And if we don't have the restriction in hand, we can remove the funding by amendment.
We can always reduce funding. And for those, I'm sure everybody knows this, but we can always reduce funding at a town meeting. We just simply cannot increase it. So that if we put a budget in that has, $500,000 for this project, we can always take it down to 250. I mean, that's obviously entirely theoretical, but what I mean is we can always go down. We just can't go up.
And so then my question I want to know an answer to tonight is for Mr. Wilson and Ms. Romberg. Would we be able to, do they anticipate us being able to have that the preservation restriction for us to review prior to town meeting?
Yes. Period. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And our plan on the thing I just showed you, it would be in April, but we would try to do it. Maybe we'll set a date of by April 1st.
That would be fantastic.
We'll have an agreement. April 1st, we'll have the draft to you. I also believe this is a negotiation and discussion. I think that's an important part of this. So there's understanding and agreement. It's an agreement, but by April 1st, we'll have that. Maybe even sooner if we can, get a draft agreement to you. You can
Okay, and so what date is annual town meeting this year?
So May 1st.
May 1st.
May 1st. So when we talk about a discussion, right, that discussion has to be through publicly posted advertised meetings, right? So we've got that you got to give ourselves that headroom. So
Yep.
we're talking about maybe one meeting we'd be able to have for annual town meeting, just so we need to really stick to that schedule. So Diane, I'm stepping on your toes, but just say we would need to stick to that schedule because we certainly, I don't think could have a lot of, we'd need to be able to look at it, have it distributed to the board and perhaps a meeting to discuss it. And that would be an up or down vote at that meeting probably.
Absolutely. And Burton, you're not stepping on my toes. This is a collaborative process. I don't have big toes for you to step on. So, no, this is important and good.
And just to know, our meeting in April is April 26th, so that doesn't give much wiggle room should there need to be another meeting to discuss it.
Can
When is the meeting in March?
March 15th.
Could we meet earlier than that in April, Heather?
It's the schedule is just kind of hard because of town meeting and pre-town meeting public hearings. So that's how we ended up on the 26th.
Okay, thank you. Nancy.
How does collaboration with the Historical Commission fit into this in compliance with the Secretary's standards? Because we need that oversight, and it did not occur in the first round of funding,
Right.
even though those were in the grant conditions. So how is this the right time to discuss that?
That is a very good time to discuss this. And I think given the fact that it was very clear in last year's document, which we've all had a chance to review, the other contingency, and I'm glad you mentioned this, Nancy, because it's on my list as well, is to say that we'd need the Historic Commission to have a good look at that preservation restriction and to give its nod or approval or sensibility that this is moving forward in a productive way. Would you like to add anything else to that, Nancy?
What would make me feel a lot better, I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the exact integration of these dates, would be to be certain that the historical architects have had a hand in the development of any plans.
Yep. I don't
that
think
could be another condition.
Okay.
Somehow.
Since I'm not an expert on preservation restrictions, I'm really going to rely heavily on the preservation architects, both Larry Sorley and if we are successful with Lynn Spencer, they'll be very much involved in that, as well as the attorney we've talked about as well. So I guess to your point, Nancy, maybe Heather knows, when is the meeting for the CHC in March and April? Because I'd love to have them look at it before you all in some ways.
Wow, that I don't know.
Give me one moment.
Because I think, to your point, we want to, use your time wisely because you have a lot of things on your agenda. And tonight, thank you so much for the time you spent with us. And it'll be a kind of a meeting where we're going over details, and we have to think through is, should we have a subcommittee maybe look at it where we can sit down and talk it all through and then come back to the committee, or do we wait and only give it to you at the committee? I would suggest maybe an alternative process, because it's wading through a lot of detailed information that probably is not conducive to one of your meetings and all the other things that you have to worry about. So maybe an alternative here is that we could even put together a group from CHC as well as from you to look at this as we're going through the development process. I'm just trying to think creatively about how to.
We just have to check that we adhere to the public meeting rules, right, Heather?
Absolutely. We just have to announce we're meeting. And
okay.
It would have to be a collaborative. Thank you, Sarah, for that point. It's important.
Right, good point.
The Historical Commission is scheduled to meet March 24th and April 14th.
April 14th. So they're meeting in advance of ours. Okay.
So Diane, just to clarify, and this may be obvious, do we not need the nod from the CHC to have our discussion because they are the experts?
I think we need a collaborative confirmation Paul, that this is going in the direction that makes both committees comfortable. And
I
so,
think that's in the first grant agreement.
yeah,
And yeah, I think it is.
Yeah. So that's reason, Paul. And I've reviewed, and I'm sure you have too, that draft agreement from last year, and it's quite clear. It couldn't be more unambiguous, you know, that collaboration and that connection took place. So now can I hear once again a proposal? And Tom Kearns, could you flesh it out a little bit this time, given all that we've just discussed?
Why? Well, I'm sure I can give it a try and look for some help from my friends. I move that we fund the Wright Tavern Legacy Trust project at a level of $235,000 with the following conditions. One, that we meet the applicant meets the preservation restriction conditions that are going to be developed that were discussed herein, that will be reviewed and approved prior to town meeting 2022. And two, there will be full coordination and sign off of the Concord Historical Commission prior to CPC sign off.
And that there will be historical architects employed by the.
And that both
Thank
historic
you.
preservation and historic architects are involved in the creation of those documents.
Number three. Yeah, perfect.
Okay,
How does that sound? Thank you.
thank you very much. Heather, do you have that?
And I will second the amended motion.
Thank you, John. All right, then let's go around, and is there any more discussion about this? Burton.
Just a question, because, and I'm sorry if I haven't been following along close enough. How have we arrived at the number 235 versus the applicant's request or the 210 number?
It's a 10% reduction in both this and the Concord, I believe I'm speaking accurately.
Okay, thank you.
And for the Concord Home for the
For the
Aged.
ages. Okay, so that's the
Yeah,
the Tom Kearns rule as modified by Paul.
yeah, so let's hopefully we don't have to have that recorded in the minutes. Please don't have the minutes reflect that. But it sounded like the sentiment of the group was that we really focus on these two applications, which I find very worthy for their own, specific reasons. And I thought that if we can largely meet their funding requests, that maybe there's an opportunity for them to find their way, forward, including a little bit of the gap. Is what my philosophy was. Obviously, it puts the burden on them to figure out how to fund the gap.
Got it.
There's still a $600 gap.
Yeah, so there's still a $600 gap, and
You can
Take
Take that out of the sign budget.
You can take it out of the right tavern. That's okay.
take it out. Okay, so that's $234,400 for Wright Tavern, and it's $135,000 for the Concord Home for the Aged.
Say that one last time. How much for right
Yes.
now?
I
200.
think I can do it. $234,400.
Oh,
I believe it's right.
yeah.
And then for the Concord Home for the Aged, 135,000. All right.
I have one last thing.
Okay. Yes.
I don't know how to add this as a condition, but I don't think we've addressed it. How do we know that the plans that are going to be developed, I hope there's going to be collaboration, but how do we know those will meet the Secretary of the Interior standards? For instance, it was stated at our last meeting that and in the documents, I think, that there's going to be recreation of an 18th century tavern. And we don't know what that's going to look like yet. And that's really not in line with the Secretary's standards. That tavern was not presented to the historical condition. So it was in one presentation, but not in the other. And I wonder if that thinking has progressed to be more in line with the Secretary's standards, and how can we address that final?
I would recommend that we, not just for expediency's sake, but for clarity, that be part of the contingency. And that therefore, that whatever the final projects is, they should conform with the Secretary of Standards.
Yeah, I think somebody needs to sign off on that. It's probably whichever historical architect is.
Yes.
involved.
And we presume a technical competency in that direction, which most of us on this committee do not necessarily possess.
Right, no,
Yeah.
me neither.
Yeah, John?
I was just going to read the sentence from Tom Wilson's last memo. We are putting together a team who does have the knowledge and involvement to assure we operate within these guidelines. And that's their, I think that's a good firm commitment. And if it's a condition, then they've promised to do it.
It should be a condition because it's the same as we heard last year. So it's just trust but verify kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because they've got a lot on their plate and they're moving fast.
And we all hope that this goes well for them, because it's
Absolutely.
it's a central building in our town, which we all cherish. And when I was speaking at the rally for the January 6th rally, which over 200 and some odd people attended on January 6th, but we were able to make a nice nod to the Right Tavern as the place where, on firm ground where so much of this started. So this obviously is deeply in the heart of Concordians, and actually it should be in the whole country. So can I hear an affirmation therefore of, let's start with the Right Tavern and then we'll move to Concord housing on the for the aged. In favor of the $234,400 for the Right Tavern, Peter?
Yes.
Thank you. Sarah?
Aye.
Paul?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Charles?
Yes.
Nancy? You don't have to. We can't hear you, hon. You're muted. Nancy, you're muted. We
I'm
can't
doing
hear
it. I would like to vote on this. Yes, I'm greatly reassured by what the future conditions and grant agreement might look like. But I don't think I can vote for it.
Okay, thank you.
Do not vote aye.
All right, and I vote aye. So it does pass. And now let's.
I vote yes too, Dan.
Oh, Burton. Burton. What? You mean you even count? Thank you, Burton.
Just once a week, or every other Tuesday.
Okay. Pardon me. Okay. The Concord Home for the Aged. We are looking at $135,000 funding for their $150,000 grant expectation. Peter?
Yes.
Sarah?
Aye.
Paul?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Charles?
Yes.
Nancy? Yes. And Burton?
Yes, thank you.
What a significant vote. Thank you. Now, did I miss anybody? All right. Therefore, I also vote aye. So we have made, we've done our due diligence, and boy, we have worked at this hard and carefully. I'm so impressed by the very careful work of this committee and the thoughtfulness and the respect that we've accorded each other as we work this through. And thank you so much, because this has not been an easy season. We've had plenty of complicated issues to adjudicate, and I think this group has managed it with enormous poise and aplomb. So Heather, we're ready now to present this as a warrant article to the town.
So I have one, we're 50 cents over.
Oh,
Oh,
good Lord, are you sure?
Yeah, I'm like, where did that 50 cents come from? It's because the Concord Oral History Project requested $22,841.50. If maybe we just put it at $22,841
Right, rather than.
and knock them the 50 cents.
Yeah,
Everyone's okay with that.
yes. Thank you very much. Okay,
So now we're good.
all right. Is there any public comment that would like to be offered at this point? Okay.
What-
I'm seeing none. Let's see, other business, Linda Escobedo, do you have any comment on how we're doing on this?
I do. I couldn't agree with you more, Diane, with the comments you made about the committee. I think this has been a difficult season, as you put it. And I think all of you have clearly done your due diligence and I think accorded the respect that among yourselves, which was really critical. I do have a question or just a clarification that I need at this point. Well, actually two. I'm not sure if Nancy's vote was an abstention or an opposition. So that you can answer this after I finish my questions or clarify it. And then the other thing that if you could just review again about the meetings in March and April that you're anticipating to work with the applicant from the Right Tavern and the HC regarding the PR. That would be helpful.
Thank you, Linda. I think it's hard to do that until we know when to your second point, till we know when the preservation restriction is done. Once we know when it's done, we'll know when we're going to be meeting. But we do anticipate that it would be that we hope the Historic Commission and we, in some combination, can serve with you in advance of town meeting.
I think we have some scheduled meetings.
Yes, we do.
So would it be fair to say that you're going to, with the applicant, try to aim for March so that you give yourself some room to work this out in April?
Thank you, Linda. I think that we've certainly heard that intention from the applicant. Yeah, Tom. Wilson.
I was looking at this, although I'm going to be on some vacation time, but what I'd like for us to do.
Tom, I just have to say the only place you can vacation is Hawaii.
Okay, well, when we join the committee, then
as long as you're in Hawaii, this is grand. But go ahead.
What we'd like to do is in the March 15th meeting is give something as a draft. And it'll have as much information as we have at that place. We have a boilerplate, so we have most of the language. It's really all around specifications of the interior space and how the interior conditions. So what I'd like to do is have on the 15th of March, give you a draft, and on the April 26th meeting, do a final decision. And then that would mean that we would correspond that with the CHC and their March meeting and their April meeting as well. Similar kind of thing. Give them a draft, get you all talk about it. If we have to, because as we've seen through this funding process, decisions of this complexity can't be made in one meeting. So give you a draft, give you something to work with, give us some chance to work it through, and then meet with you again, the following meeting, so that we meet before that's all in place, locked in, everybody feels good about it before the town meeting.
Thank you, Tom. And I would respectfully request that we get enough advance time before the committee meets.
Sure. Yeah, right.
People have a chance to really read it through and digest all that you're presenting.
Need to be able to, it's complicated because we got to get a lot of work done between now and then, and so we'll get as much as we can.
I mean, that's what Stuart Sagamore said. He said, look, these conservation preservation restrictions are hard to get together and they take more time than people think.
Right.
So starting yesterday is grand. So yes, Sarah.
But before I say what I was going to say, I'd just like to add a comment to what Tom just proposed. I think that works out well with the dates, because the HDC meetings, there's 2 meetings between our 2 meetings. So that means
HDC or
historic,
yes, sorry, the historic district. So that means that
no.
Historical.
It's the historical commission.
Yes, sorry, historical commission.
Okay.
you meet on the March 24th and 14th, and then CPC meets again on the 26th of April. So we'll see the final version that has hopefully been approved by the Historical Commission. So I think that will work out really well. Yeah. But what I was going to ask Diane was, obviously we're planning for success, and I'm sure this will all work out. But if it doesn't work out, and for whatever reason the preservation is not put in place and these various contingencies are not met, can we just assume that that extra funding would just go back into our reserved funding or such like, or do we need to lay that out somehow?
It would have to, Sarah, because we couldn't increase. We couldn't give the.
No, but we wouldn't lose it. That's what I'm saying. We wouldn't. It would actually go into.
Right over. Thank you.
Okay,
Sarah.
great. Okay.
We can't give the 50 cents back. 50 cents back to the library project.
I just wondered if we had to write down somewhere, you know, if we didn't give it to Right Tavern, where it would go, or if it's just.
There's a general.
And this is
yeah, it would just remain, well, you would have to vote to amend your warrant article.
Okay, we can do that.
And then to remove that line item. And then that funding would just remain in your unspent balance. So
Great.
Next year, it would come under the line item of prior year fund balance.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I should have clarified that for people who are new to the committee. All right. Well done. Let's look at some approval of minutes. So Linda Escobedo, does that answer your questions? Linda, hello.
Hi. Yes. If you've taken into account, you know, the sequence of meetings, and in between there will be the public forum, yeah, public hearings and so forth. So, okay, good.
Thank you very much. Heather.
So we do have some more voting to do. I do need a motion to authorize me to draft and submit a warrant article based on these recommendations. But I did want to ask one question before we have that motion on the table. Stuart Sagnor in one of our prior discussions did bring up that land acquisition projects are usually done in a separate warrant article. We looked back in our past, and Concord has always just had land acquisition projects within the CPC warrant article. So I did ask for town council's opinion on that. Town council said there's no hard and fast rule. He said land acquisition requires a 2/3 vote at town meeting, while CPC only requires a majority vote. So if we keep the Aspet River land acquisition project within this warrant article, our entire warrant article would need a 2/3 majority vote at town meeting. If we want, we could separate out that land acquisition project into its own warrant article. So only that one would need to receive a 2/3 majority vote. And then the rest of the CPA recommendations would just need a majority vote. So before we have a motion on the table to authorize me to draft a warrant article based on these recommendations, I wanted to clarify if you want one single article or if you want the land acquisition article pulled into its own separate warrant article.
You know, I understood that was the case. And then when I said that last week, Marcia said, no. You know, and I had understood that the land acquisition had to be a separate warrant article. So let us, do I hear any opposition to the two rather than the one? Hearing none, let's go forward with that.
Diane, I would just say, I don't recall us doing that in the past, and it strikes me as strange because we're not, it's not a vote to acquire the land. It's a vote for us to give $1 million to the town to put together with other funds to acquire the land. So there's presumably a vote of 2/3 on the acquisition of the land by the town, but that's not what we're doing. We're not acquiring land on the town's behalf. I'm just very surprised at that interpretation of the majority requirement. And we didn't do it that way when we acquired the Warner Pond land.
Right. We've never done it in the past. We've never pulled it out separately.
Yeah, I doubt you'll have trouble convincing 2/3 of the town to support you at town meeting, but I I would be regrettable if we set ourselves up for this and we were incorrect in our interpretation, and we were not able to fund that because we got, 55% of the vote.
Well, then are you arguing that we should get a 2/3 vote for all of the warrant articles?
I'm arguing, I don't think we need a 2/3 vote.
I know you're arguing that. Town council seems to disagree, and you're a lawyer. So the two of you get together.
I'm not a municipal lawyer, that's for sure. No, yeah, so maybe there,
discuss it among yourselves.
I mean, you could have a motion to authorize me to do either after clarifying with town council on Burton's question.
That's
And if town council says, oh, our mistake, it doesn't need a 2/3 majority because CPC isn't acquiring the property, and it would only need a majority, then just do a single article. If town council stands firm on their opinion, then do 2. It's up to you guys.
We need Burton to make this motion.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to do that. Since because also the planning board always needs 2/3, and boy, that's a big hill for me to climb this year, I'll tell you. So what I would make the motion that we do it as two articles if there is indeed a requirement that funds used towards land acquisition must be approved by a 2/3 vote. If that is not correct, when the funds are going to be combined with other funds and there will be a separate vote at town meeting, then we should do it as one vote or one article.
Thank you. I think we need a vote on this. Tom?
Second.
Okay. Tom, can you, aye?
Oh, aye, yes.
Nancy?
Aye.
Burton?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Sarah?
Aye.
Charles?
Aye, and I just wanted to say, however, that the town, and as far as I understand, the CHTC is going to acquire this money, this land, not the town of Concord. And the CHTC has the capability of doing that without a town meeting vote.
Good information.
Oh, I'm so glad I'm not a lawyer.
I'm not a lawyer. I'm sorry. It's my understanding.
I love
I
it.
may be wrong, but it's my understanding. That's the case.
No, I
The
think
CHTC was established as an independent agency.
that's exactly right, Charles. Thank you very much. And Linda, you would agree with that? Can we see a nodding of heads? Thank you very much. Thank you, Charles, for that clarification. Sarah?
I'm sorry if I zoned out and missed this, but did we answer Linda's question about whether Nancy was abstaining or voting against, just for the minutes?
No, we didn't. Nancy?
Do I need to choose? If so, I'll abstain.
Okay, abstaining. All right.
Wait and see.
Okay. A skeptical abstention. All right. Can we then now vote to have Heather? I guess we've consummated that by having Heather present the warrant article for us and write it. Heather, just a moment to thank you. You just do so much, and you've met with Stuart. I mean, you've just done so much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
All of us. I mean, you're just brilliant. And we're so lucky to have you on board. Okay.
And to Diane, I would also like to say, thank you, Diane. This has been really challenging. Lots of issues.
Thank you, Nancy.
Diana, sorry to interrupt. I think we may have stopped that voting midstream. I think that I made that proposal.
Oh, no.
And to either do it, to Heather get some more feedback, and I think you got the votes up to Charles. So just for the record, we might want to complete that, so we've got it.
Who hadn't voted? I guess me. I
hadn't. I'm in favor.
Burton, you mean you count again? Burton and Nancy.
I voted. Yeah, I voted. Just reaffirming.
All right.
Sorry.
Burton, some people just want to be important all the time. What can I say? Okay. All right. Let's you're fantastic. Let's look at the December 21st minutes. Are there any corrections, emendations to that particular document?
Not me.
Okay, all in favor of accepting that document, raise your hand, please.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Terrific. And January 4th, 2022 minutes.
I was present at that meeting, and I think the minutes do not say that I was present.
Oh, you're right. So you want to be important too, right? Oh, all these egos. What kind of- okay. Thank you, Rose.
And Heather, I had submitted one very minor change. Did that come through?
Yes, she's saying yes, Peter.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So all in favor, including the anonymous.
May I just ask a question? Apologies, Diane. Really just clarification for me. I did notice that in the minutes, when you list, Heather, who's present from the public, sometimes it's just a single name. I assume it's not the full name. I assume that's just because you don't know the rest of the name because they didn't show it. Is that correct?
Correct. That's just
Yeah.
how their name appeared on Zoom.
Okay.
And if they didn't speak, they didn't clarify their last name.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Legally, I don't even have to list others that are present unless they speak. I just think it's helpful to have it noted.
I agree. Okay, thank you.
I also think it's a courtesy to those who spend the time to attend. And I was grateful for the, I tried to write down all the names while we were meeting, and I was really impressed by how thorough your accounting of that was. So now, before I forget again, Burton, on the January 4th, 2022, may I see signs of hands in favor of those?
Can we just get a motion and a second on both of those? You can do
Okay.
it in one.
Okay,
We accept January 4th minutes as written.
you say December 21st and January 4th. I think Heather would like a formality with this. So can you do both, Nancy?
Yes, can you amend that to be both?
Thank you. May I hear a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, Burton. Paul,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Nancy,
Aye.
Charles,
Aye.
Sarah,
Aye.
and I as well, and I do so declare. Any other public comments? And Linda, thank you for your helpful comment and your perseverance throughout this fall and early winter event. Okay. May I hear a motion to adjourn?
I'm sorry, may I just ask first, Heather, would you please send us the dates for the upcoming meetings? I don't have them anywhere, I don't think.
Yep, I can send you them, and they're also online.
Yeah.
Oh, they're online, then don't worry, thank you.
That would be
Okay.
great. Just as a separate email to us, just to remind everybody and give us a chance to, put it in our personal calendars. Tom?
Heather, will you put those in the minutes to the meeting? Those dates?
Oh, that
I can, like the ones we discussed for Right Tavern, or
Right.
All the meetings for the rest of the new year.
well, I don't think they need to be in the minutes, but I can send them out in an email.
Great.
Okay, that would be grand. Thank you. Tom?
I just had a request. Heather, can you send the revised matrix to us?
Yeah, that'd be terrific, Tom.
Great,
Thank you.
so we can all remember.
And I'll have it in our
Yeah.
files. That would be
And
terrific.
the draft warrant article when you get your
Yeah.
marching orders.
Right. Thank you all so much. All right, may I hear a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Thank you, Paul. And Nancy seconds it, and Burton? Aye? And Paul?
Aye.
And Tom?
Yes.
And John?
Yes.
And Peter?
Yes.
And Nancy?
Aye.
And Charles?
Aye.
And Sarah?
Aye.
And I do too. Thank you all for a lovely evening. And Paul,
Aloha.
yeah, I'm just going to say,
Paul, is this your first time there?
Oh, no, I've been here before.
Okay, so you don't need any of our suggestions.
Well, you never know, but
You probably, I'm sure you've done them all.
Well, may you have, when are you coming back?
never.
Yeah.
In a week and a half, 2 weeks.
Hey, you know what we could do? We could take some of the residual money and all of us could have our next meeting there. Okay, goodbye.
Hi, everyone.
On that happy note.